Good morning, good afternoon. Welcome to the Mount Airy Baptist Church and 50 Hoops opportunity to share some health education information. So it's my pleasure to welcome you all here, and more importantly, it's my pleasure to introduce the founders of 50 Hoops, which has been one of the largest small nonprofit organizations in the country dedicated to providing health education information for African Americans. So I'll turn it over now to the founders of 50 Hoops, Mr. and Mrs. Ed and Pat Sanders.
Thank you, Robin. First, I need to say that I don't know if any of you know this or not, but Robin is on our board of directors. Dr. Kelly is a newer member, and I'm telling you, she is quite valuable to this organization. We'd like to welcome all of you to the premiere of the 2022 50 Hoops lecture series. This year, the legends are on a quest like none before. The lecture series this year is also an introduction to an important topic on the lips of corporate community outreach executives on websites, emails, and workshops around the country. What is it? Diversity and inclusion. This year, the legends will give you a taste of what their communities are doing about diversity and inclusion. These are the keys to getting the D&I process started, and we call them the 10 Commandments for recruiting African Americans into clinical trials. And since this is the age of technology, Ed and I are going to give you the software and the hardware that make up the 50 Hoops legend. This year, no tears, as they reveal their new legend's journey and introduce you to the 10 Commandments for recruiting African Americans into clinical trials. First, the software. We're very proud to present Dr. Robin Kelly. Keyword, expectation. We've traveled a season with Dr. Kelly from coast to coast and learned something about her. She's open and receptive to life, willing to try anything new, and always expects the best. Many of us start our day off looking at the problems that need to be solved. Robin starts her day with cheerful words and great expectations. She's creative and explosive with ideas, especially adept to creatively solving problems in her unique way. She looks at life daily as a new beginning. And Robin brings to mind Psalm 32:11. Be glad in the Lord and rejoice and shout for joy.
And now for the hardware. Dr. Robin Kelly is chair of the Health Education Ministry of the Mount Airy Baptist Church in Washington, D.C. She's worked closely with both community and church ministries on youth and women's issues such as domestic assault, health, and nutrition. She works with nonprofit health organizations and has received a cooperative agreement from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention Division. Robin got her BA from Vassar College, her MSSW from Columbia University, and her PhD in Public and Community Health from the University of Maryland, College Park. It's your show, Dr. Robin Kelly.
Thank you so much. I now want to turn this, thank you again, Pat and Ed, for just welcoming me with open arms, as you always do, to not only journey with you through physical travel, but also through this wonderful opportunity of learning and growing in clinical trials and health education. We have a number of members from our church in Washington, D.C., which is the Mount Airy Baptist Church. I'd like to take a moment to introduce, there's some reverends on, Reverend Karen Taylor, but also our minister for the moment, Mr. Johnny Sudds. Also on is Miss Jennifer Lee, who's our MC for today. Miss Jennifer Lee is an outstanding educator, and she's renowned throughout the Washington, D.C. area, having won many awards, particularly for communication and education. So without further ado, because I know some people have to leave a little early, we don't want to miss anything, particularly from Dr. Bourdon or others who may have to leave. I'll turn this over to Jennifer, who will lead us and shepherd us through today's opportunity of learning and growth. Jennifer.
Thank you so much, Dr. Kelly, and it is my pleasure to be your MC for today. I bring salutations to all of our listening audience. We are so elated that you have joined us on this particular virtual platform for this very important event today. There is an old African proverb that states, if you want to go fast, go alone. But if you want to go far, go together. And truly, the Mount Airy Baptist Church Health Education Ministry, under the auspices of Dr. Kelly, has joined forces with this phenomenal organization, 50 Hoops Legends, to present today this special webinar focusing on recruiting of African Americans and Hispanics into clinical trials. We also today will be updated with cancer research information. And finally, monkeypox and COVID-19, the two latest viruses that have been plaguing our communities. Yes, 24 years plus, 50 Hoops Legend has been leading the charge of touching, teaching, and enlightening our community for their outstanding work in these studies. So with that being said, they are taking it to the streets. Yes, indeedy, the grassroots approach. They have 10 commandments, but we will be focusing on 3 of them today. Commandment 1, thou shalt have a dedicated interest in recruiting minorities into every clinical trial. Commandment 2, thou shalt not see minority recruitment as a problem with them, rather, a problem to be solved by you and your clinical department. And finally, Commandment 3, thou shalt not become complacent or closed-minded with only doctors that produce greatest numbers of recruitments. Instead, seek sites with more accessibility to African Americans and Hispanic patients. At this time, we are going to bring our first medical professional to this virtual platform. Dr. Jose Bordon, MD and PhD, is the CEO and founding chair of the Washington Health Institute. He is an infectious disease expert who will talk about monkeypox, COVID-19, and clinical trials. Welcome, Dr. Jose Bordon.
Can I jump in here, please? We need prayer. Can Dr. Suggs please give us a prayer before the speaker starts? Invocation. Thank you. We're preachers' kids.
Let us bow our heads and pray. Eternal God, our Heavenly Father, we turn to you now because of who you are and more. Our provider, our peace, our strength, our refuge, our knowledge, our hope, our healer in these challenging times with COVID-19 and now monkeypox virus invading our land, not only locally, but internationally. We're grateful to you for Dr. Robin Kelly and her esteemed guests today. We thank you for embracing their minds to obtain and retain the knowledge with understanding to share with us today. Now set our minds to listen and internalize over any distraction that try to come between our getting understanding and freely asking timely questions on the subject matter. Oh God, as we hope in you, fill us with your peace and joy in receiving simple things even we can do for our health and the health of others. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Please continue, Dr. Bordon.
Good afternoon, everyone. Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, yes.
Very good, excellent. So I'm delighted to be one of the speakers for today, and I have to say thank you very much, Dr. Kelly, all the board of the directors for the 50 Hoops. You are doing an outstanding job here for the community and many others. You are spreading a lot of hopes, knowledge that is very needed. And also, I'm proud to be one of the speakers with Dr. Jonas and Dr. Subaranath. So let me move here in directly to my presentation and to tell a little bit about myself. As you may have heard, I'm an infectious disease doctor, so this is probably one of my strengths, but probably is one of my bias. So I see many things from this perspective, but it's very timely. Infectious diseases, as you heard from, the AIDS epidemic, and then the viral hepatitis, and then SARS, and followed by COVID, and now we are dealing with a few other things. So what I want to bring today to the discussion is how we can work together with the community, how we can engage each other, the doctors or physicians or providers to the community and the community to us. So this is a two-way path and we need to assist each other. I'm one of the founders of the Washington Health Institute. And as you can see, it's a primary care facility that is also focused on research. Can you move to the next slide, please? I will be a little bit fast because of the limited time. However, you can stop me for any questions or comments anytime. So briefly, I will be talking about diversity, and diversity means, in this particular case, a minority population in the clinical research. I will be talking about a new guy that is in town for a very long time that we call the respiratory syncytial virus, that is the RSV and the new vaccine, and the monkeypox that is in our town as well. Let's move to the next slide, please. So in relation to the benefits of clinical research for the minority. So our minority populations, like the African Americans, the Spanish population, Asian, and so on, are not taking full advantage of all these opportunities. And I would say that in the case of HIV, there are about 20% of representation in clinical trials by the African American community, 20%. When this epidemic of HIV affects, is represented by 50% or sometimes even more. So when we see, unfortunately, people suffering from HIV, we see that there are about 50% of them, they are African Americans. However, they don't participate at the same level in research. Means that the data or the support or the knowledge that we are bringing are not tested for them. And this could be something that may not be the best approach or the best service for them. So we need to be sure that we open this discussion and to understand each other, how we can make this easier and to be sure that we work together. And I'm not blaming anybody here. I'm in the inquiry mode. I'm in the question mode. That's the only thing that I'm doing. Because when we get a new medicine after clinical trials, after completing the clinical trials, that may not be the best medicine for this, for the minorities that didn't participate. But that's the medicine that we have to treat these illnesses like HIV, viral hepatitis, and so on. Next slide, please. So this is what the representation or the distribution of races in the US. You see there that Caucasians are about 72%. When you see the next circle, those participants in clinical trial from Caucasian from 72 moved to 94. So they are even more predominant Caucasians participating in clinical trials. But the thing that I would like to highlight the most is that the minorities, and just taking two minorities, the Hispanic dropped from 16 to 1% and African American to 5%. So these are numbers that if we work together in making this teamwork, I think that we should have this Hispanic community, that is my community, and the African American community more representative in clinical trials. Next slide, please. Well, it's easy to say, but it's not so easy to do it. And I think that we are missing some opportunities here to work together. So physicians and providers and researchers, they have to be sure that they bring the message that is culturally fitted for the minority population. And also the language should be appropriate. All the materials that we bring and we share with minorities should be fitted for them. And we need to work with advocacy organizations. They are the hub for minorities as well. The social media and many other representatives in the community. Next slide, please. So how we can increase this participation among minorities? Well, we need to bring a clear message up front that health and safety comes first in research. I will repeat once more. Health and safety comes on the top of the list. Second is about that if a person is in the clinical trial, we close very, very closely for any health condition, any health changes, any health challenges. So those who are participating in clinical research are, we overreact in the monitoring of those participants. I think that this is something that participants or those candidates to participate in clinical trials should understand, that they are not alone, and we pay a lot of attention because this is demanded by different regulatory organizations like the FDA, IRB, and many others. Next slide, please. So I think that what we can do here is to work more to bring an effective message. The message has to be effective. So it has to be tailored with images, with the wording for this minority population, for the African American population. Let me tell you, and also the messenger has to be effective. Let me tell you one thing. I remember in the early days of the HIV epidemic, my African American patient used to ask me, give me that pill that Michael Jordan is taking. And so they felt represented, and they feel that that person, Michael Jordan, was doing well, was effective, and they believed in that person, and they trusted that person probably more than others. So that was something that helps to understand how we have to tailor the message and who can play the important role to get minorities at the table. Next slide, please. Let's move to the next topic here, that is about the RSV, or respiratory syncytial virus, in particular in adults. Next slide. So this is a virus that is common, a little bit less than flu. Flu is very, very common. But the complication related to this condition is quite bad in adults. So this is what can happen to probably even myself those who are 65 and older in particular, grandpa, grandma, they have a heart disease, they have a lung disease, and suddenly they end up in the ER, in the ICU, unfortunately, for what we call a flare up of the heart problem, a flare up of the lung problem. This is something easy, but it's not exactly like that. The question is, what's the trigger for that flare up? And many times it's because of this virus, what we call the RSV. Next slide, please. So this virus could be something simple in young people, but not so simple. It's simple in the sense of you get the illness and you clear the illness on your own if you are young and healthy. But if you are not healthy and you have a bad condition like bad diabetes, bad asthma, or bad lung disease, the RSV could be a big problem. And how we make a diagnosis is similar that we do the diagnosis to other viruses, like what we call PCR or polymerase chain reaction. Next slide, please. So these are the stats that help you to understand the magnitude of the problem. We have about or more than 14,000 deaths a year in the US. That's a big number. And the most important is that we can prevent many of these deaths if we have the tool to prevent. And we'll talk about the tool to prevent. Next one. Next one, please. So I spoke about this. These are the main conditions that are associated with bad outcomes due to RSV infection. The next slide. And one of the worst is the heart attack, what also we call acute myocardial infarction. So these are, in winter time that grandma or grandpa got a flu or shingle or the RSV, and they have a silent heart disease sometimes or not silent, but they end up with a heart attack. And this, again, can be prevented. Next slide. So how we can prevent this? Like many things in infectious diseases, by frequent hand washing, and be sure that you are cautious and don't get close to sick people. If you do these two things, I think that you probably will be much, much safer than not doing that. And this is like saving your money in a good stock market at high rate. If you don't do that, it's like you will bankrupt and get in trouble soon. So hand washing and be sure that you don't get close to sick people are key components for prevention. Next slide. So yes, this is a problem in kids, and kids, fortunately, they have a treatment that is quite effective. It's not the case for adults. Adults, they don't have treatment for RSV infection. So because of that, next slide, I believe here is the WHO is working, prioritizing the development of vaccines for RSV. In the same way that, we have vaccines, we would like to have vaccines for RSV in the same way that we do for influenza, for COVID, and so on. Next slide. And this is the vaccine that is available for research. It's in phase 2, phase 3. This time, the two leaders, Pfizer and Moderna, that were competing for the COVID vaccine, now they are competing for the RSV vaccine. And the outcomes are looking quite promising. So I can tell you that if this is the case, that we get a good RSV vaccine, that I wouldn't be surprised that down the road will be combined with the COVID vaccine and the flu vaccine and RSV vaccine in one shot. And that will be fantastic. That is a dream. But I can tell you that the industry is working very hard to get these medicines available. So be aware of this vaccine, and if you can participate, is your decision. Next slide. And the last topic for today is monkeypox. This is something that has been endemic in Africa, in particular in Congo, in the east of Africa, and in West Africa. But now we have this problem in town, and Western countries in particular, but is worldwide. Next slide. So this is very transmissible, it's very contagious, but we can prevent that. And you can see that the distribution of monkeypox is mostly in those states with the highest population. You see the dark blue is where they reported the highest cases of monkeypox. Next one. The first case of monkeypox was reported in the US in May. See the trend. Now we have about 5 digits of cases in the US after 3 months. I would say that this is expected to go into the 6 and 7 digits, probably in 1 year or less. But it depends on us. It depends on us in how good we are in preventive measures, hand washing, and be sure that you don't expose when it's in risky settings, on risky encounters. Next slide. So monkeypox can be spread by skin to a skin contact, but by very close to a skin contact. So it's nothing like if you share your hands, yes, you can get the virus, but it's very unlikely. So let's talk about the common thing, the bulk of the problem, not the anecdotes. And this is transmitted mostly by heavy skin to skin contact. And also, unfortunately, the mother can transmit us to the baby. Next one. We have a preventive vaccine that is Jynneos, 2 doses, 4 weeks apart. The safety or efficacy, I would say the efficacy is about close to 90%. And the safety is quite good associated with side effects. Is recommended for those who has been in contact with someone with monkeypox. It can prevent the development of illness if you get this thing within the first 4 days of the symptoms. But it also preventive in the first 14 days of the symptoms, but much more if you get the vaccine within the first 4 days of the symptoms. Next slide. This is a rash illness. You can see here in the pictures that are mostly skin deformations that are papules. In the center, they have a deeper area that we call umbilicated. And you can see here in the left lower quadrant or slide, you see like with pus or whitish fluid in, so that is pus. These lesions can be almost anywhere in the body, but mostly hands and cuticle area as well. The worst cases are when it affects the rectum and the mouth, and when you see those lesions that are bleeding lesions. Even the ones would be those that accidentally was planted in the eye. So the person touched the eye with the infected hand. Next one. So in conclusion, the participation of minorities in clinical research is extremely important. It's essential to take full advantage of new medicines. Minorities and anybody in the population should be aware that health and safety is important. Also, we need to be aware of viruses that are creating a burden in our community, like the RSV. There is a new vaccine that is very likely will be available in a short time. And pox outbreak, I think that can be mitigated largely by mindful physical exposure to others. Any questions or comments?
Dr. Gordon, I just have to say that your discussion and your presentation was so insightful. We now know knowledge is power, and that is very, very important, especially people of color, that they have the knowledge base in order to go forward so they're infected by and affected by these horrific viruses that have presented in our communities. So thank you very, very much. I wanted to ask one question myself, is that monkeypox, because it's had a negative connotation saying it's coming out of the Congo, are they going to change the title of it so people don't necessarily associate it with that particular region? Because there has been talk about that because of the negative that comes along with saying monkeypox after and whatever, or are they just going to leave it like that?
Well, yes, stigma is a problem, and we need to be sure that we don't bring, we don't blame a particular region or country or any particular continent. I remember the same thing happened to China and COVID. Right. I believe that the world is becoming a small house, we are a family. Yes, we should do everything that we can to avoid the stigma and blames. And I'm very supportive of that job. I think that the CDC is working in that regard, and hopefully with more clarity and fairness, how we are very respectful of each other.
Thank you so much for sharing.
You're welcome.
It was powerful. It was absolutely powerful. Thank you so much for sharing. And all the work that you do in this particular area of study. Thank you.
I think there's some hands that are raised. They may have questions.
Yes. Any other hands?
Please proceed.
Mm-hmm. At this time, because it may go over, can individuals wait to ask their questions at the end of the presentations? Appreciate it.
Dr. Bourdon has to leave though a little
okay.
earlier. Yeah, so thank you very much. I think Miss, there are two questions. Yeah, Lewis, I think Ms. Lewis had a question, and Maribel.
Yes, I have a question. My name is Diane Lewis. I'm in the Bay Area. I'm a former clinical recruiter for the Alzheimer's Research Center. And I know that this is just an overall to recruit better, but is there any suggestions on how to get through these intellectual institutions more people of color to get into the recruiting roles? That's where we found the barriers, is that a big research institution, it's really rare to find a Black recruiter. And I was just wondering about the hurdles to get more people of color into recruiting.
Well, that's very true. I think that you are 100% correct. We have people here working in our center who are Americans, and they are very successful recruiting African Americans.
Yes.
And also we have Hispanic recruiters and same thing. And yes, I think that this is about the culture and the trust. And the same applies for different ages. So if we want to recruit young people, you should consider a recruited young guy, and vice versa for other ages. Yes, I agree with you, and I think that this is a good tip for anybody who is not aware.
Thank you, Dr.
Thank you so much. Is there one more question before we move on? Not. Thank you once again.
Yes,
I have my,
Yes.
I have my, yes.
Okay, I see it now. Thank you.
Yes, hi, my name is Maribel Rodales from Retail Tampa, Florida. So I have a question. Thank you for the presentation. This is amazing and very informative. And you're so right. Usually they identify when you're with similarities to open doors. But my question is, I don't know if this is true or a myth, that the older generation, including myself, who had the pox vaccine when we were young, the one that left with tons of little dots, that actually protects us for the monkeypox. Is that true? Is that a myth?
That's true. That's true. And even today, you can read that in many journals, including the New York Times. So we suspect that people who got smallpox vaccine in the early days are protected. Now, one thing to have in mind is that we are not sure how long will continue the protection, 3 or 4 decades, but still some degree of protection is expected. So what I'm trying to say is, if today we have a pandemic or similar that we have to COVID, and you can say are protected, but if I were you, I will get the vaccine in the case of a monkeypox pandemic. This is case of, it doesn't make up the pandemic at this point in time. So the answer is yes, it provides protection. This is what we strongly believe. We don't know the degree of protection. And we're learning daily about monkeypox, and related to pox are coming all the time.
Thank you.
You're welcome. I'm very sorry, but I need to leave. So if there are any other questions, I'll be happy to do by email.
We appreciate it, Dr. Gordon.
Anytime.
And have a blessed and safe travel wherever you may have to go.
Thank you very much, everyone.
Care.
A pleasure to participate in this wonderful conference with all of you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Yes, so as we move forward, I know that we're on a restraint. Do you want to do the web break at this point, Robin? Dr. Kelly, or should we move? Okay. We have 3 more individuals, but I just want to say that keep in mind, wellness is important across the board. So once again, you can do chair exercises, you can go to aerobics class, you can walk, but definitely include some form of exercise each and every day. Also include deep breathing exercises. They just help you to woosah and relax. Thank you very much for our Wellness Minute. So as we move on, we are going to bring 3 medical professionals to the virtual stage. Dr. Jonas, who worked with the Mid-Atlantic Kaiser Permanente Genetics Institute on strategies to advance precision medicine. As part of this particular study, Dr. Jonas is conducting on the most effective ways to encourage individuals at risk for certain types of cancers to complete genetic testing. Also, Dr. is chief of Mid-Atlantic Permanente Medical Group Genetics Institute, a researcher. I want to say an MD at the Mid-Atlantic Permanente Institute, MAPRI. She is duly board certified in genetics and biochemical genetics. And they are going to be joined by Charmaine McKee, who is a clinical trial research nurse. Welcome all of you to the virtual stage.
Thank you so much, Jennifer, and thank you so much, Robin and the 50 Hoops team for bringing us today. We're so excited to talk a little bit about diversity in research and talk about a few projects that we have going on to that topic to life. Next slide, please. Just wanted to briefly point out, so we are from, as Jennifer said, we're from Kaiser Permanente in the Mid-Atlantic, and many of you may know Kaiser Permanente for the care delivery, but we also have a very large research group inside of the organization. We have about a 40-person strong research division inside of the MIDIC regional programs, and we serve Maryland, Washington, D.C., and Virginia, and our research stretches across all of those service areas. Next slide, please. So this is an overview of where we'll go with our discussion. We'll move forward, and so if anyone has questions and follow-up, we're always happy to answer this. Next slide. So in terms of the diversity in healthcare, obviously well known that diversity is important to healthcare and care delivery, and research is really no different from that. Research is really most successful when it uncovers and addresses the needs of specific group way that those groups need those needs addressed. And I wanted to show 2 specific ways that our research and our clinical care has worked there to address an unmet need and then implement a program to serve an underrepresented group. So on the top, we have our new Pride Medical at Capitol Hill Medical Center. And so our research team actually uncovered some specific care needs within the LGBTQ community that weren't being met. And so we used research to define and establish a program called Pride Medical at Capitol Hill, and it's a new LGBTQ focused program in Washington, D.C. that does specifically those care gaps for patients in the LGBTQ community and meets their specific clinical needs in the way that they would like those needs to be met. And then in the lower right, I wanted to highlight a few years ago, our research had uncovered some gaps in care for specific communities in the Baltimore area. And so as part of meeting these needs, we partnered with local salons and barbershops to provide preventive healthcare services within those communities through the Good Health, Great Hair program. And just 2 examples where the research really uncovered a need that we were able to address through a clinical program. And so we'll talk a little bit more about how we've addressed diverse community needs in our research in a few more slides. Next slide, please. So diversity is also important to genetics and genomics research. Everyone's hearing about genetics and genomics and how it's guiding the future of healthcare. Genomics researchers are studying everything from cancer to common conditions like diabetes or heart failure. But unfortunately, most of genetic material being studied is from individuals with European ancestry. And this is very limiting to discoveries. Slide, please. When diverse communities are missing from the research, the discoveries are limited, and the discoveries that are made might not be applicable to all groups, as was mentioned in other presentation, it's important for research participants to reflect who's going to end up medication or the health engagement program or the program coming out of the research. When individuals aren't included as part of the research part of the development, it can result in lack of availability for appropriate medications or effective medical services once the program is live. Next, please. So there's a few groups traditionally underrepresented in research. We've talked a lot today about the racial and ethnic minority groups who are underrepresented, but there's also other groups, so socioeconomically disadvantaged groups, also individuals with disabilities, the LGBTQ community, also pediatric patient individuals can be underrepresented in trials, other types of research. Next slide, please. So throughout our research journey with our medical group, we really want to kind of consistently address that there's very reasons that certain are hesitant to participate in research. And by understanding those reasons, addressing those reasons, and working with researchers and community members on ways to overcome those, that hesitancy, we feel like that's really the path forward. So we don't really shy away from talking about historical abuses. And this is something we've worked with our community on quite a bit to understand how best to address these. Although some of these examples listed here may have happened, years ago, decades ago, they're still very, very fresh and well known within our communities. And we've been working with our communities to rebuild trust. And through trust, we can then rebuild relationships with our community members, making them become, helping them become more comfortable with accessing medical care, but also participating in research opportunities. Recently, there's also been, a sort of misinformation issue that both researchers and clinical care providers are confronting. And then there's just a lack of access sometimes. Sometimes trials don't accept run into them. So again, they're just various reasons that people might be hesitant and various ways we're working through those with our communities. Next slide, please. There we go. Oh, real quick, can you pop back one? One more down, a little box, there you go. I just want to grab that blue box at the bottom. So one of the ways that research has responded to these abuses is that it's very heavily regulated. And we always like to tell our participants that and help them understand that a lot of participant protections in place. So informed consent is a big one, making sure people understand what the research study is, what participation means, what they would or would not get out of it, disclose how the research will be used, things like that. It's important for people to understand what they're agreeing to. And also institutional review boards are boards that provide oversight, specifically around protecting participants. So next slide, please. I'll turn it over to Dr. Sawanrat to talk about a specific example of diversity in clinical trials and why it's so important.
Thank you, Cabell. And I just wanted to follow up real quick on that institutional review board aspect. I'm the chair of our Mid-Institutional Review Board, and we view diversity really importantly as important as well. And we take pride, or I take pride in my IRB, and that we have a very diverse representation, multiple varied backgrounds, both racially, ethnically. We have non-science, have people within our organization, but we have community members. And if there's anyone in the DC area that's interested in being a community member for our IRB or part of our community advisory board, please get in touch with Cabell and myself. We always are very excited to have those opportunities to engage with the community. So an example of importance of diversity in clinical trials, Dr. Borden had mentioned this a little bit, but one example is this medication called clopidogrel or Plavix. You might have heard of that. It helps prevent clots. It causes your blood not to clot easily. So people that have had heart attacks and strokes might be put on. Now, the early studies looking at clopidogrel were not looking at broad populations, and it turns out that 2 to 14% of the population are poor metabolizers, including Asians. So that means that this drug may not work well. It might cause more bleeding problems or might cause problems, which we obviously don't want. So lack of diversity in clinical trials can mean that these differences that are based on our inheritance, our genetics, are not detected until a drug is released and used more broadly in the population. Another example of diversity in clinical trials or recent data analysis is looking at clinical trials that evaluated treatment for high blood pressure and failure. And there was a specific combination of medications that showed better effects and reduction in mortality in Blacks, but not people. And so you can imagine if you have a clinical trial that only includes Northern European Caucasians, you're going to miss out on that information and that benefit. So that's why we're really focused at trying to get equal representation and making sure that any studies and research that is reflecting ourselves. Yeah. And another example that I want to go over is the importance of diversity in genetic research, and that's kind of a follow-up to what I mentioned with the clinical trials. You know, clinical trials can certainly identify differences that might be related to all sorts of factors, socioeconomic, but genomics diversity is certainly a big factor too. So genetics and genomic studies identify genes and genetic changes that are associated with illness and wellness. There are studies focus on response to drugs related to certain genetic factors, focus on appropriate dosing, and also focus on identification of inherited risks for example, for certain type of cancer, like prostate cancer. One way to improve our genome data and information is with a type of study called a biobanking program. And there could be biobanking programs that are looking at tumor tissue or normal tissue or DNA from blood or saliva, but having a lot of a broad range of representation from these biobanks is certainly important to having better clarity, even from just level of doing genetic testing and knowing what genetic change is relevant or not. So certainly the majority of biobanks to date have similarly to the slide that Dr. Borden showed, the clinical trial participation, biobank also are majority European ancestry participation. And we are working really hard to change that with the Mid-Atlantic region and Kaiser Permanente nationally. We do have a rank. Cabell might speak to that a little bit later, but we are trying to increase our representation for African American, Pacific Island, and Hispanic populations, particularly with participation from our region in Mid-Atlantic that is incredibly diverse. Part of the Californias and then Hawaii. So I will turn it back to Cabell, and we can entertain questions around genetics a little later as well.
Thank you so much. Next slide, please. And Dr. Swanerat mentioned, oh, next slide. Oh, I think we're going backwards. There we go. Next slide. Okay, yeah, if you maybe around next slide. Yeah. 14, here we go. So this is our community advisory board. Just Swanerat mentioned this group. This is a group that we partner with around all of our research in the Mid-Atlantic states. Every research team is invited to work with them. They're community members, community leaders, faith leaders, parents, a really diverse group. We work with them across all sorts of different activities related to research. We are always looking for new members. And so as Dr. Swanerat said, please let us know if you're interested in joining our community advisory board. I'm going to turn it over to Dr. McKee next to talk about ways we work with patients within the context of a clinical trial. Next slide, please.
Thank you. So one of the questions that was posed to us for this presentation was how we support diverse communities so that they are not regarded as difficult or problematic to a clinical trial. So as already mentioned, a community advisory board is really helpful in getting community input, stakeholder input once we start a clinical trial or look at designing a clinical trial. And on the diversity bit, institutions can recruit more females and minorities into research positions. And I'm proud to say that, for the Mid-Atlantic states, Kaiser Permanente, we are very diverse. Dr. Swanerat said earlier. Also, it's been known that having these partnerships through the community-based participatory research is very good, promoting, again, that community involvement, having stakeholders, individual community. There have been initiatives where the recruitment occurs in churches, church leaders be presented with the information so that they can then talk with their group about the various opportunities for collaboration, even having the bottom-up experience, recruitment, and also not just recruitment, but also community education, health education. Because once we have an educated community, the individuals are able to make informed decisions as to whether they would choose to participate in a particular trial. And also, something that's very important, and it does include diversity, equity, and inclusion, is cultural sensitivity. So having these elements will really help with supporting diverse communities to be active participants in research trials. Next slide. Great. So I thought this was a quite an interesting article that I found in the in Medicine journal, and it talked about keys to recruitment and retention in translational genomic studies, but I think this can be applied across the board to all research trials. And again, like I said earlier, stakeholder engagement. So stakeholders would include not just the researchers, but the communities from which participants come. Formative research in terms of having a pilot, a small scale study before a large scale trial, because that way you get to work out the kinks before the full trial is rolled out, be it regionally or internationally. And to always remember that clinician buy-in is important, because the clinicians, they are the face of the institution when it comes to routine care for their patients. That's when you have that interaction through patient visits. Having the clinic be well informed about the clinical trial actually help facilitate recruitment. As a rule, in our clinical trial department, when it comes to a drug trial, an interventional, we tend to have a process where the physician or the nurse practitioner first reaches out to their patient to discuss the study. And if the patient has an interest, then we as the research nurses would then reach out to these patients. And just again, we also offer, we call it patient reimbursement, but small stipends to assist with transportation, parking, just overall transportation costs. And it's just, incentivize our participants, let them know that, that is valued. And we, as such, we will compensate them for their time. And recruiter training, recruitment oversight, not just IRB, but just as leaders within clinical research, we make sure to have our research nurses and research assistants are well trained, the responsible conduct of human research. So that's actually one of the requirements of for these positions, is that we have these annual trainings, not just Kaiser Permanente training, but also NIH modules that we need to complete to be competent to carry our clinical trials. And also the number 7 on here, flexible targeted outreach. We become accustomed to having a 9-to-5 type of work situation. But just from my experience working on various trials, is that reaching individuals in the hours, in the evenings, weekends, we even accommodate individuals who work during the week to accommodate Saturday study visits, assisting again with costs, especially those coming from long distances, as we have all these medical office buildings throughout the region, and going, let's as an example, from Corner, Virginia to Gaithersburg, Maryland, that's quite a bit of a hike. So we tend to assist with reimbursing transportation costs for these patients. And also study branding to help build buzz around a study so that individuals are familiar. There's that name recognition that goes with a particular clinical trial. So sometimes we call these trials, names that would help with recruitment. So we have a trial called PACES trial, the ABC trial, just to build some buzz around recognition of these trials. Next slide, please.
And so I know we're over our time. I just wanted to check in, Robin. We can skip forward a little bit, or we could wrap up in the next 3 to 5 minutes. What would be best from you all's end?
In the honor of everyone's time, I'm wrapping up in the short amount of time. Any questions that they may have would be the best way forward if you have such opportunity.
Okay, great. So we'll skip forward this example. So we'll just skip this slide. This slide, skip. And then Dr. Sawanarat, do you want to talk just real quick about cancer care, and then we'll wrap up with participation opportunities?
Sure. So cancer, as everyone here is probably unfortunately well aware, is common. 1 in 2 men and 1 in 3 will be diagnosed with cancer. And that is across all of the populations. And that means that it's very important to have representation related to cancer care. Genetic research guides clinical care improvement, not just for cancer, but certainly I think something that touches a lot of us in such important ways. And having the research to identify research to identify treatments, research to identify risk factors and ways to prevent cancer for our families. Those are all really important areas to touch on. Next, please. And so, again, some of the importance of research in understanding disease and cancer in particular, and developing evidence-based treatment and management, and in a really personalized way for you. Not for someone else, but for you. And to be able to do that, we need to have broad representation and a true understanding of the natural history of disease in a diverse population. Next, please. I won't go over this in detail. I just want to throw this out here as a geneticist who also does a lot of cancer genetic counseling and speaks with a lot of families. But the rule of twos, when to think of a possible heritable genetic cause for cancer risk. So the numbers for those affected with cancer, that's truly worldwide. I think that there can be some variability there related to ability to diagnose and detect, depending on where you are in this world. But keep in mind, cancer diagnosis, if you look at a cancer registry, includes even cancer. So there might be things that people don't typically think of as you know, needing chemotherapy or whatnot. It truly is a broad diagnosis and a common diagnosis. I'll toss it back to you for the opportunities for participation.
Okay, so in the last 30 seconds, we'll skip to the next. Talked a lot about ways to get involved. So we've talked about biobanking, all of the NIH's biobank, it's nationwide, anyone can join if you're interested. I've also listed some other biobanks left. If you are a member of Kaiser Permanente nationally, anywhere in the US, you can the Kaiser Permanente Research Bank, which is our own biobank. Information is found on the right. Next slide. Of course, many people know about disease-specific biobanks. I called out these because we're involved in the Parkinson's disease biobank called Black PD in the Mid-Atlantic. There's also a PD Generation, which is a genetics study on Parkinson's disease worldwide. Next slide. And then we also just wanted to put out some other ways to be, if you don't want to give your own healthcare data or samples. So there's ways to volunteer, there's ways to be involved in community advisory boards. Please think about us if you're considering that, is to serve through just sharing your personal information about research. And then next slide. And then of course, if you're interested in finding a clinical trial, clinicaltrials.gov is the best resource for that. And again, thank you all for the time, and we'll take any questions. Appreciate you all staying the extra few minutes for us.
Thank you so very much, of you. I mean, your passion and commitment to this particular area of study is just phenomenal. And I just want to say thank you again. I did have a question. I know I have a friend who's just recently, the child was diagnosed with lupus. They now are using the chemotherapy to treat his lupus. Is the thing that has come through a trial, or how did that come about?
I'm sorry, I can't speak to that specifically, although I would say it's unusual for males to have. And so I think that's the population where research really is important. Why why are certain populations at higher risk for disease? Why are women more likely to get lupus than men? What are the different factors? And when men get lupus, why is it so more complicated and so much more difficult to? So I can't answer the question specifically about you know, the chemotherapy and the immunotherapy that is used for some of those more complex cases. I would certainly hope that there was research evidence to back that up. You know, in medicine, we do a lot of things kind of not quite as evidence-based as we might like or need to, particularly for rare disorders. But I think that just means we need to work harder on getting those rare diagnosis, rare situations pulled together so that we can have meaningful information for everyone.
Thank you so much.
Just to add to that, with regards to the chemotherapy for lupus, it might not be necessarily therapy, it might be immunotherapy, and those are more targeted treatments that can it pretty much targets these cells that might act like cancer cells. Just the same way with lupus, it's pretty much has to do with these targeted therapies that are built with chemotherapy as a start, but now they've been where it's more targeted and they're called immunotherapies, but they're also administered by the oncology infusion clinics. So that might be the difference there.
Thank you so much for clarifying that. Are there questions?
Yes.
Is
it possible to get copies of the slides that were presented today?
They'll be online on the video in about a week.
Gotcha. Okay, who should I just contact Cassandra, maybe?
50hoopslegends.com.
Gotcha.
In the chat, Dr. Jonas has put information, her contact information, so you can also get some of that from the chat in terms of how to reach out to Kaiser and get more involved. And we will have a poll that'll be coming up before we have a closeout prayer. Oh, I think there's another hand up. I'm sorry, Jennifer.
Yes. Yes. Mr. Square, another question?
I do not.
Okay, his hand was. Anything else? Going once, twice.
There's one chat.
Is there one in the chat? I can't see it because I have the chat open.
Yeah, so I see that Miss George, it looks like that's a pretty complex situation, but in general, it sounds like the CAR T, all of those really, especially CAR T, there are some certain situations where there is approval, but a lot of those instances are part of clinical trials and very specific protocols. And including immunotherapy for those more complex situations. So, you know, I would certainly say speaking with your partner's oncologist and really inquiring about research opportunity is a way to go. I would note that, that on clinicaltrials.gov, it really is an open site. You can look up any study. A lot of you might be familiar with it already, but for those of you who aren't, any research study, particularly clinical research, has to be listed on clinical trials. And if you just scroll down to the bottom, it'll have the clinical trial coordinator contact information. You do not have to have a physician referral to contact that person. I can say from having done clinical trial coordination in one of my very, very, very past lives, and also working with coordinators for certain rare disorders, they want to hear from you. They are looking at any to identify potential participants. They are eager to speak with you. I have been on calls with my patients that were talking to research coordinators. My patients wanted to be there for that extra support and listening, and but not physicians have that time. But they clinical trial recruitment, one thing to look out for is you want to look for coordinators and researchers that are open to you have as many people in the room as you need to understand what's going on and make your decision, right? But I think for Mr. George, you know, that sounds like a really complex situation. You know, if you're interested in research opportunities, that might be the way to go if you haven't already looked into that.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
So we're launching one poll. We're going to launch one poll. We'd like everyone to take a moment to poll. There are 5 questions. Okay, so again, we thank you so much for your time and attention during the webinar. And as Jennifer had said, it's been such an informative opportunity to engage with researchers, those who are in the field, who are in institution, started their own health institute, as well as those who are working in genomics and encouraging us to get involved. So as they were saying, diversity matters, and so clinical trials, this is a door that's been open now to clinical trials, and we do hope we all walk through it, or we encourage our family members to take advantage of clinical trials. I'll turn it back over to Jennifer. Once you leave the poll up for 20 more seconds, I'll close out. We have a gift, a $50 gift card that we'd like to make sure that someone receives. So,
tell her to.
Well, we do that. We're gonna
Robin, we need you to pick someone.
Closing the poll in 10 seconds.
Robin, we need you to pick someone for the gift card, and also send us their email address, their mailing address as well.
So we are inviting the person who's a number. We're just going to pick a number of the person who's come in. Let's see if those who are still online. Looking at the number of people and the names we hear. So we're going to pick number 15 to win that gift card. Okay, let me see the participants. And that person is, I'm just trying to see the participant number.
It is.
Okay, take a minute to do that.
It is.
Chat. Okay.
Let's see.
Okay, there we have it.
You got it?
One, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. That's Mr. Kevin Wilson.
Oh, fantastic. Congratulations, Mr. Wilson.
And we'd like you to, we'll put in the chat the way you can retrieve your gift cards to contact Mr. Ed Sanders, put his information in the chat.
Thank you, Dr. Kelly. I just once again want to say that what a marvelous, marvelous webinar that we had today. It really needs a part 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I mean, because the information was just so incredible that now we know that we're putting faces, no longer are patients, no longer are people, literally just a number. We're going for a holistic approach of working with everyone in this field. Everyone is a partner in this particular struggle in order to cure these diseases that have plagued society. I just want to once again, I want to thank Dr. Bodin. I want to thank Dr. Fisk, Dr. Prim, of course, Dr. McKee. I'm sorry that I did not use doctor before with your name. Once again, I just, for all the work and due diligence that you each and every day in order to bring to the forefront the need for clinical trials and how these trials will really impact people of color who unfortunately are disproportionately suffering from these particular diseases. I just want to thank you again for all that you do.
And now we'll have close out prayer with from Mr. Reverend John, our own Reverend Johnny Elsett.
May the Lord bless you and protect. May the Lord smile on you and be gracious to you. May the Lord show you favor and give you his peace. Amen.
Amen.
Amen. Thank you.
Thank you again for all who participated in this wonderful virtual forum. Take care and be blessed.
God
Thank you
bless.
so much.
Thank
Take
you.
care.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.